Hello and welcome to Marriage Matters, Episode 2. I am, of course, joined by Greg Schutte, who's a licensed therapist. I am Blake, and we are going to be talking today a little bit about objectivity versus subjectivity. How I wanted to start this discussion is, Greg, talk to me about when it comes to your sessions. Obviously, you have to remain impartial because that's your job as a third-party moderator. Talk to me about why that's so crucial in a session.
So do you want my subjective thought on this or my objective? Sorry. No, this is something that I learned early on as a therapist, is because when people come in, there's so many times where you feel yourself drawn to one or the other because they're very good at articulating what's going on in the relationship. And I'll just be real honest, a lot of times it's the woman who will come in and she can remember all the details and the guy is sitting there going, I don't remember what I had for, breakfast. And so there's this, and I think sometimes that's why I've seen where guys struggle with coming to therapy because of this imbalance. And so, early on in therapy, I found myself siding going, well, she's making a great point here. You must be a schlep. And I'm sitting here going, hold on. And the longer you work with a couple, more of the dynamics, more of the bigger picture comes out. And so it's one of those, for me as a therapist, I have to remind myself, don't jump to conclusions, really start to gather information and look at the whole picture. And so that's one of those things. And also understanding that they each have their own perception. And so they're bringing that, and it doesn't mean that their perception is their reality, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's based on fact, but it could be just how they're perceiving things. And that's another one that you see often in therapy is, when couples are not communicating well, they start to try and understand one another. They try and figure each other out without enough information. So these perceptions, start to really get crazy. So you have to take your time and really get that objective, what's going on there.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that as well, because I am one of the guys that doesn't articulate what's going on well, especially when I find, for me, I'm normally pretty good at articulating and figuring out, what the issue is. The problem is when it relates to my wife, who I care about a lot, and there's emotions involved, then that's when, my articulation, I'm like, oh, this is not as easy as I thought it was going to be.
Or when you're trying to navigate with your spouse, and they're throwing all these things at you and you're struggling to put it together, then it starts to become this panic, and you're just trying to, weave through different conversations and trying to remember things, and it can get very muddied in your head. Yeah. And I think that's where sometimes that communication will break down, and that ability to really see clearly in that situation.
Yeah. Well, the perspective of both partners is also important to hear both, because we are wired differently as male and female. As guys, when we talk about in our programs that we teach, guys tend to be more logical, like A plus B equals C kind of thinkers, versus I feel like sometimes with women, it's, if A prime is true and B prime is true, C is true, but only if, and there's a lot more connections made there. And it's not that guys are idiots or that women are overcomplicating things. It's just we're wired differently. And so there might be something that the man's missing, or there might be something that the woman's not seeing from the man's perspective, or, whatever.
Sometimes there's that you'll see that, but then there are those who are just the flip.
Yeah.
Where, the male is more of the feeler and the woman is more logical and I shouldn't even say it that way. Like, they're not logical. That's not what I'm saying, but they're more cognitive. Let's put it that way, where you're just like, okay, wait a minute, I got to flip my brain here and really look at this.
Well, and I feel like too, one of the things that my wife and I have dealt with was that's flipped for us depending on the stage of life too. I mean, there was a time where, when we were dating, we were engaged, even early in our marriage, I was very much the more, logical thinker, not highly emotional, all of that. And she was much more the feeler, which it was a good balance because I needed her to remind, hey, these people that you're talking about have feelings. You should be kinder to them in your speech.
Hmm.
Um, and then on the other side of things, I'd be like, okay, honey, I understand that you're upset about this, but keep in mind X, Y, Z. What's been interesting though is sometimes we'll have conflicts because our perspectives have shifted in things
Hmm.
because of various things. Sometimes it's mental health, sometimes it's just a particular situation hits us wrong. And so our roles will reverse, or we're both trying to be logical, but we're doing it from two different perspectives. And so you end up arguing the same point and the same perspective, and you're like, wait, why are we fighting about this? Like
Yeah.
we're literally agreeing, but it's because we're going at it from two different directions that it just gets.
Well, a lot of times we're not listening. We're not really hearing what's being said, or we're not understanding what's behind what's said too.
Yeah.
And that's where we get ourselves kind of in that difficulty. And the other thing that really I see a lot of is when you have a talker and a non-talker, because that's where perceptions really start to get disconnected and different. Is you have one that's talking a lot and really articulating their feelings, and the other one's not saying very much, and so it leaves the talker to what's going on in their head.
Yeah.
And again, that can lead to this difference of understanding of what's going on. So yeah, whenever I work with a couple, the first thing that we look at, outside of do you have enough time together to really work through a problem, is where the communication breaks down. Because I think this is the hardest part when people come into therapy. It I describe it this way: it feels like a mouse wheel, where the problems got to this point because we disconnected. Whatever it is, we're not spending time. We're trying to guess each other. We're trying to interpret what's going on in their head because we're not really talking. And so we start to create these different perceptions. And so when people come in, it's this battle of perceptions, and then you have to stop them and go, hold on, let's talk about why you have that perception. And usually when I've built that perception, I'm looking at it from this view while you're looking at it from this view. And I often say, how do you meet on this? And couples look at me like, you don't? Yeah. Until you stop and really listen. So the first thing that we do in communication is making sure that you're taking time to understand their perception. And that can even be hard because, the subjectivity comes in to play there too, where you hear what they're saying and you quickly want to say, that's stupid. I don't agree with that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And then we're done, because it's like now my defenses are up, versus going, wait a minute, why do you feel that way? And why are you thinking that way? And I often have to tell the couple or the one who's listening, hold on, it doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree. And people will be like, wait a minute, hold on, no. It does. No, it doesn't. At this point, it doesn't matter. Do you understand is the first thing. Because if you don't understand, all bets are off.
Yeah.
And so you've got to seek to get that understanding of their perception. And whether you agree or not is not the most important thing at first. But once you understand it, then we can then we know what we're dealing with. And I think that's, just like anything, one of the things that I've learned, my kids are in speech and debate. And one of the things that I really picked up from that I use with couples is define your terms. So when you're doing debate, if you don't define your terms, we're arguing two different things and we're lost. Yeah. But if you define your terms, we know what we're talking about. And too often, that mouse wheel that we get on is one of, we haven't defined terms, we're talking about two different things, we got two different perspectives, and we're just going round and round and round and round.
Yeah.
And then the arguing starts, the yelling, because we're trying to just be heard.
Yeah.
And so that, it's the objective look at the subjectivity. I mean, it's a little crazy at times.
Yeah.
But trying to get, and when you start to help couples see that, you can see the things calm down, and then we can start to focus on the real problem, and then hopefully get to the root.
Yeah. Well, and that's the biggest thing we wanted to highlight today was just that difference and that contrast between objectivity versus subjectivity. And speaking of defining terms, objectivity is oftentimes, what we call in other words, looking at the bigger picture and, trying to, in many cases, you're not removing the emotion out of it. You're viewing the emotion as one part of a larger issue. And sometimes it's an obstacle. Sometimes it's actually it's a, for lack of a better term, it's a boon. It's a good thing that you can, take into account. And you're like, wow, my partner's really passionate about this. That's actually something I really appreciate. Um, and so, you're viewing that as part of a larger picture, versus subjective is it's a relative position. It's, bound by a certain set of circumstances, or as a person, this is just my viewpoint, or like you said, my perceptions, my reality. But I also like the point that you made about it's not always based on facts. We actually talked about that in our Teen Talk podcast of, sometimes our perception needs adjusted, which is the whole point of therapy, really, is adjusting our perception and then how we act on that. So yeah, I appreciate highlighting that context, and also, making sure that our words are fully encompassing the scope of what we're talking about, and nothing more, nothing less.
Well, and to add to this too is the whole helping people understand each other's subjectivity or their subjective way of looking at things. Because sometimes we don't want to look at that. We want to get more heavy into what happened and why, but sometimes it's important to understand that the depth of why, how our spouse looks at things. And that's, I think, what can help in that is the whole personality assessments. So we've done that in class, where I encourage couples to take a personality assessment and talk about that, because within a personality, you have strengths and weaknesses, and you have different ways of dealing with things. So for an example, with me and my wife, one of the things that always got us in trouble was I'm one of those feeler types, where it's just like, well, of course I'm a therapist. So anyway, so I would go into a conversation and work through it. And it's just like, let's talk about it. Let's emote. What do you feel about this? And my wife is like, we're not feeling here. It's what's the facts? What do we need to do? And let's make a decision. And without knowing that can seem cold to a feeler. And mine could feel like very frustrating. Well, it was frustrating to my wife. It's like, no, let's stop. There's no reason to feel. Well, there's always a reason to feel. But I mean, I think the thing is we have to understand each other's subjectivity. And maybe that's the wrong way to say it, but how we look at things. And it's not always right or wrong. It's just kind of that personality that plays out there. Now, we'll have to really get to the objectivity of now how that plays in our marriage and the things that it's causing, so that we can work with it. And that's, that's that understanding.
Yeah.
But that's, I was just thinking about that how sometimes some people get too cognitive and don't get into emotion. And then some people are too emotional and don't look at it, kind of logically. So it's a balance in there.
Well, and I always love this. It actually came out of an argument that my wife and I had, that I actually kind of had this thought, and I remember journaling it, because it really has honestly defined a lot of the disagreements we've had. And it's just the statement that I have to understand the real to move towards the ideal. And that's hard for me. It is, I'm very much someone that I see what I want to happen, and I see the end goal, and I'm very good about trampling people on the way to get to that goal. And actually, Greg and I took a personality test a few weeks ago for a speaker.
Right. That's right.
And we found out that we were exactly what we thought we were. He is very much more people oriented. I am not. My personality is very much task, steps to get there. Great. Oh, you got in my way. Move. And that doesn't fly very well a lot of times when it comes to interpersonal relationships. But the problem is that can carry over into your marriage as well, if you are that type of person. And so,
that's why looking at these kind of things is really important.
Yeah.
I think people have taken different personality assessments, or, there's even the 5 love languages, where you kind of get this idea of what makes the other person tick. But I think that it's very important to look at that, because in marriage, you don't want to deny it. You don't want to fight against it. It's
Mhm.
understanding it, understanding our strengths and building upon it, and understanding our weaknesses. And the beauty of marriage is really dealing with those, trying to reduce those and how they really negatively affect our marriage.
Yeah.
And, but that understanding of each other, it helps you understand what I always say, the quirkiness of the
Mhm.
other person, which is how
Yeah.
God made them.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and understanding too, not just the what's of what's going on, but rather the why. That's
mhm.
that's what something I love about the love languages is they're great. Don't get me wrong. Like they reveal all kinds of things about how to more effectively show your partner that you care. And because I was guilty of for so long um, showing love in the way that I like to receive love, and was not recognizing that with well, honestly, even with my family, but especially with my wife when we got married, that she didn't care about that. I mean, she appreciated it, because I was doing acts of service for her. But
Mhm.
she's like, "Thanks for doing the dishes without being like, I don't. Can we just sit on the couch and like I can just lean up against you because like I don't." And so, and so it's like, oh my gosh, I've been completely missing a whole thing. But yeah, it's just understanding the whys of not just we get so caught up because that's what's tangible, right? Is the what's that why feel the disconnect. And I know that this isn't happening and this isn't happening. This isn't happening. It's like, okay, but stop. Why is it not happening? What is, one of the most frustrating things I ever had one of my classroom teachers do was we were in English and we were writing like it was like informative papers or something. And of course we all love English class. I joke, but I did like English. I didn't like it today that day though. Um,
I've never been good at English, but
yeah, I had and my instructor, I was writing a paper and I showed her my thesis and she goes, "Okay, cool, why?" And I said, "Well, because this." And she goes, "Okay, yeah, I agree. Why?" And she did that like, oh, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 times. And of course, my little high school self is just beyond frustrated at this point because I'm like, stop asking me why. But it's true because she's trying to drill down past the biases, past the emotional aspect, past the whatever. And then come to find out, lo and behold, when I got all the way down to it, I didn't really have that substantial of a claim because what I was talking about was based entirely out of just this false perception or facts that aren't really facts. They're true for
or I
me.
want this to be
I want it
true.
to be
Yeah, this
true.
sounds good, and
Yeah. And,
yeah,
and it just, she was like, there's more to it than that. She goes, I'm not saying this is a bad claim, and I would agree with you on this, but we've got to figure out where this comes from.
yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of
Well,
truth to
and that
that.
makes me think also when I'm working with a couple, one of the things that we're trying to do is help them um, to really meet this need that the other person has
Mhm.
and to feed that need. The problem is we guess at it. We think we know the person because we've lived with them so long. We've
Mhm.
loved them. But even working with a couple just yesterday, one of the things that was missing was I'm not feeling fed. I'm not feeling like you care about me. Okay, let's talk about why, what that
Mhm.
looks like, because sometimes those big statements of you don't care about me is hard for that person to grasp. It's like, no, wait a minute, I go to work, I do this, I've done that.
Mhm.
And so we had to boil it down and say, okay, let's talk about one need that you have.
Mhm.
One need. I need you to, be at home more. Okay, is that enough information to meet that need? Yeah, I think so. You sure? How much time does she
Mhm.
or he need you to be at home? Doing what?
Mhm.
And so it's that making it so it's not this, I have to try and guess, I have to think of what you mean, I have to, you know, it's here, tell me. And I've
Mhm.
always said this to my wife, just tell me what you want. Well, if you're not paying attention, that, then you don't really care. Not that she doesn't say
I
that
know.
anymore, but I mean, a lot of people do. It's just
Yeah.
like we want them to care so much that they know everything about us and they know exactly what, but
Mhm.
we can't. And after a long day at work, some days I'm not in that mode. And so
Mhm.
I'll say to her, just tell me. Because if I know, I can do something.
Yeah.
And that's where it's making it that very objective versus, well, just know what I want. No, I'm lost.
Yeah.
And when you help couples break that down, that's when I write it all down and I turn it to them and I say, this is gold. This is gold because now you know exactly what to do but it's also the rope to hang yourself on, because it's one of those, well, I'm not going to do it. Well, fine, then you get what you get.
Yeah.
But at least we know what we're up against versus this mouse wheel that we're just going around and I have no idea what to do or how to stop or how to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and we need to be, if all else fails, be more specific than you think you need to be. Like
Yeah.
that, I was reminded of, I have a bunch of engineer friends, and they were joking about how in the design process, you write things into this computer to perform certain actions, and then somehow the computer still messes up and does it the wrong way. And then they realize, oh, I wasn't specific enough on this one thing. And they use the example of making a PB&J sandwich. They're having to read all the instructions. They go all the way down, and they get to the section where it says, put the knife in the peanut butter. They didn't say which end of the knife to put in the peanut butter to use to spread it. So the guy, the little automaton or whatever it was, just drops the knife in the peanut butter handle first. And they're like, no, that's not what I wanted. It's like, okay, but that's was it wrong? And so it's like, oh,
okay,
crap.
Now we're going to frustrate somebody who's watching this with this whole idea of, you mean I have to explain everything? That's just crazy. You shouldn't have to do all of that. And okay, so let me qualify here, because I think this is important. And you're right. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
So it's one where we have to help each other help us.
Mm-hmm.
Oops, keep hitting my mic there. We need to help each other help us,
Mm-hmm.
so that explaining and help them understand what it is that I'm looking for, what I need. But this also means that the other person really has to be paying attention and not just checking out and always going, well, I'll check with you. And for example, my wife is always saying, look, I write all this stuff up on our calendar. Just look at the calendar. And I continually will go home and I'll be like, so what do we got tonight? And she's like, did you look at the calendar? And so there is a responsibility that I have. And she's right. She's done this to help me out, and I don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it indicates that I need to do that. Or early on in marriage, she would get frustrated because, and I've heard this many times, you didn't notice I got my hair cut. I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm a schlep. Well, just tell me that you got no. And so we do have to be trying to pay attention,
Mm-hmm.
but we also have to not, expect the person to be perfect on that. And I think it's a give and take. And so I want to be very clear to anybody who's like, what are you saying? That yes, it's a both and. We have to pay attention. We have to do our best, but we also have to understand and give grace and give mercy, and not,
Yeah.
you didn't do it, so that's another.
Well, see, I don't like that example, Greg, because I don't think she ever noticed when you got your haircut.
Well, that's true. That's true. And I think we're going to have to change that at some point here, because it's still hard.
We're still working through that.
We're still working through that. So that's why we got our mug. Yeah.
Bald is beautiful. Don't you worry. Well, that is all the time we have for today. We are very grateful to you all for joining us. Thank you, Greg, for your time. We are looking forward to our next episode, but we just wanted to remind you, your marriage is a gift, and it really does matter. See you next time.
Bye.